have one new message. Translating. Disney and Pixar's Hoppers is now available on Disney+.
You could say that again.
Critics are calling it Pixar's funniest movie ever and a wildly entertaining ride. Blizzard Potato. It's certified fresh and verified hot.
Now we party.
This is incredible!
Wow, I am clearing the rest of the day.
Disney and Pixar's Hoppers, now available on Disney+. Rated PG.
This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month, with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
Hi, True Crime Army. I'm taking a little bit of a birthday break this year because I embarked on a 1,000-mile road trip with my girlies, and I'm heading back to New Jersey to enjoy my birthday with my family. That said, I didn't want to leave you high and dry, so I'm sharing a bonus episode that I released earlier this year to my Patreon and Apple supporters. After you listen, let me know what you think, and if you're feeling generous for my birthday, I don't know, maybe rate the show 5 stars and say happy birthday. With that, see you next week. Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder, a true crime show where I discuss cases involving military members and veterans. But if you're listening here today, you already know that because you are one of my faithful supporters. So I do want to take a quick poll. How many of you watch true crime documentaries on Netflix? Yes, me. I am very guilty of this. And guess what? Today's story actually stems from my curiosity from a based on a true story Netflix show called Unbelievable. At first, I almost didn't watch it. It wasn't a real documentary per se. It was a portrayal of a case. And I only ever watch those if I'm only out of real documentaries to watch. But for whatever reason, back in 2023, I pressed play, episode after episode. And at the end of the miniseries, when I realized that the perpetrator was a veteran, I just about choked. I raced to my desk and began researching the real-life story behind the limited series. And that's the story that I'm bringing you today. So if you've seen the show Unbelievable, you will be familiar with much of this story. But if you're not, buckle up, Buttercup, because this case involves one of the scariest types of criminals. The ones that slip into your house through the window in the middle of the night, take what's most precious to us, which is our sense of security, and then walk right back into the darkness, never to be caught. And then they do it again and again and again, every time picking a new victim. Today's case does not involve a murder, but it does involve rape. So please listen with care. Join me today as I tell you the story behind Netflix's series Unbelievable. This is a case against Marc O'Leary. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
It's the middle of the night in late August 2008 inside a quiet suburban apartment in Linwood, Washington. An 18-year-old woman known publicly by her middle name, Marie, was asleep in her bed when her life was completely changed. In the middle of that night, she woke up to a man standing over her body. He was masked, and before Marie could even process what was happening, the man pressed a knife to her throat. He bound her wrist with shoelaces. He gagged her with a cloth, and over the span of several hours, this man brutally raped this woman, never letting her forget how easily he could just kill her. At one point, the man did something that made the terror even worse. He pulled out a camera. The flash went off as he photographed Marie, bound, terrified, completely exposed. And then he threatened that if she ever told anyone what he had done that night, those pictures would end up online for the world to see. Before the man left, he forced Marie into the bathroom. He made her shower, disposing of any DNA he could have left behind. Now, this is the kind of crime that people like to believe only happens in horror movies. The kind of planning behind a story that feels too calculated, too cruel, and too cinematic to be real. But for Marie, this was not fiction. It was her real life. And despite everything that this man told her, despite the threats and the fear and the shame, after he left, Marie immediately reported the assault to police. What Marie didn't know quite yet was that her decision to report would change her life in ways that she could never have imagined. You see, Marie grew up in the foster system. She moved between different homes, different foster moms. She never had that one consistent adult advocating for her. Her life was lived in survival mode, becoming a chameleon, blending into whatever environment she was forced into. But despite this life, she had recently moved out on her own. She moved into a transitional home for adults who recently aged out of foster care. So when Marie met with police to disclose what had just happened, she was coming from a very scared place. And so as she was disclosing what the intruder had done to her and the assault that lasted several hours, the reactions from the people that she thought she could trust were mixed. Some believed her and others didn't. And very quickly, the focus started to shift away from the man who broke into her home and violated her and onto Marie herself. The detectives in Linwood, Washington were not trained to recognize how trauma can present differently from victim to victim. So when they sat across from Marie, they focused on what didn't match their expectations. Her emotions seemed flat. She wasn't hysterical, she wasn't screaming, she wasn't sobbing, she wasn't breaking down the way that they thought a real victim should. And now real is in quotes, right? And as Marie recounted the attack, there were small details that shifted slightly from one telling to the next. And that's the thing about this case, is that they kept making Marie tell the story over and over again. To the detectives, what they were witnessing in Marie, those emotions were not typical trauma responses. They weren't trauma responses at all. They were red flags. So instead of questioning how fear and shock might be affecting an 18-year-old who has just survived a violent rape, investigators instead began to question Marie herself. Her credibility, her honesty, her story, it was all on the line. And here's the cruel irony in this case. The number one reason that victims of sexual violence don't report at all is fear of not being believed. But Marie didn't hesitate to report. She reported immediately because at just 18 years old, she was finally trying to build stability. And when she reported the rape, one of her former foster mothers was present. Instead of supporting Marie, though, this woman was openly skeptical. She told police that the story just didn't sound right, that it felt exaggerated, maybe even made up. And that doubt landed hard because by this point, investigators were already uneasy about Marie's demeanor. And now, one of the adults closest to her was reinforcing their suspicions. So they decided to press harder. They went back in and they asked more questions. But this time, the tone was different. It was sharper, more accusatory. And that's when Marie's resolve started to crack. One detective warned her that if she was lying, there could be consequences. She could actually lose her housing. She could face legal trouble. And for an 18-year-old who had spent their entire life in systems that can be taken away in an instant, that threat was devastating. Terrified and overwhelmed, Marie began to doubt herself right there in the police station. She wondered out loud in the presence of these detectives if maybe it was all a nightmare, if maybe she had just imagined it. And that was all it took. With the victim now sitting there questioning her own reality, police decided the crime never happened. In an almost unbelievable turn of events, Marie was then charged with filing a false police report. To make it stop, to avoid even worse consequences, Marie took a plea deal, a misdemeanor conviction, a $500 fine, and mandatory counseling. Her rape was officially labeled a hoax. Her credibility was destroyed, and the case was closed. And with that, the man who actually broke into her home, who bound her, who raped her, who took pictures of her and threatened her, he walked away. Free, unknown, unstopped. But Marie was not lying. And she was not this man's only victim. In fact, her case was just the beginning of one of the most disturbing serial rape sprees in recent history. Over the next several years, this same attacker would go on to terrorize at least 5 more women. And even as Linwood police were closing Marie's case, labeling it a fabrication, Another woman just a few miles away was waking up to the exact same nightmare.
Need a laptop that's built to perform and designed to last all day? Select Windows 11 PCs starting at $499.99 are now at Best Buy. Learn more at bestbuy.com. Best Buy. Imagine that.
Adobe Firefly is the all-in-one creative studio with AI-powered image and video editing for today's creative process. Built for creators of every kind, Firefly helps you generate, edit, and experiment fast. Because the asks aren't getting smaller, the budgets aren't getting bigger, and the timelines, oh yeah, still tight. With all the best creative AI models in one place, Firefly brings your ideas to life. Unlock a better way to make with Adobe Firefly.
2 months after Marie's attack, the same man struck again. In October of 2008, a 63-year-old woman was asleep in her apartment in Kirkland, Washington, when she suddenly woke up just after 4 a.m. There, she saw a man standing over her. He was large, masked, and before she could scream, he pressed a glove over her mouth and a knife against her throat. "I could kill you," he told her. He then bound her hands and began to rape her. This victim was also held captive for hours. The man cut her with the knife and then punched her whenever she resisted. And then he took out a camera and began taking pictures of the woman. All the while, he taunted her, threatening to kill her and her family, and even threatening to cut her eyes out if she ever reported what he'd done. When the assault finally ended, he forced her into the bathroom and made her shower. Before leaving, the man took a pair of her underwear and he took the pictures, leaving her behind, bound, bleeding, and terrified. As soon as she was able to free herself, she called 911. Kirkland police arrived and carefully documented the scene. They collected partial DNA that preserved what little evidence the attacker failed to erase. And when the victim described what happened, a masked man, a knife, restraints, photographs, a forced shower, something about it felt familiar to one of the investigators. That investigator later reached out to Linwood police. They were like, "Hey, remember that recent case, Marie? And I think these two cases might be connected." But by that point, Linwood detectives had already decided Marie's rape never happened. So they told Kirkland, "Hey, there's nothing to compare in this case because our victim, Marie, she made a false report and she later recanted." And just like that, the thread connecting the two assaults was cut. By late 2009, the Kirkland case went cold. The partial DNA from shoelaces sat in evidence. The file gathered dust. There was no suspect to match it to. And the man responsible moved on without fear that they would ever be looking for him. His crimes in Washington state had come to an end, but only because he was relocated. His next victims would be more than 1,000 miles away. On October 4th, 2009, just outside Denver in the suburb of Aurora, the same pattern began again. The victim this time was a 65-year-old grandmother living alone. For the purposes of this episode, I'm going to be calling her Beth. Beth was asleep when her nightmare began. Just after midnight, she awoke to the weight of a masked man on top of her in her bed. He bound her hands, cut off her pajamas, and over the next 4 hours, he raped her repeatedly. When Beth tried to scream, the man leaned in real close and told her to be quiet, or he'd kill her with the gun he brought with him. Beth believed him. Then he pulled out a camera and photographed her naked, bound body. He told her that if she ever went to the police, you guessed it, those photos would be made public. Before leaving, the man stripped the beds of the sheets, he took some of Beth's clothing, he wiped down surfaces, and then once again, he forced the victim into the shower. As Beth sat in the bathtub, she was convinced that this man was about to drown her. But he didn't. Instead, he left. Once he was gone, Beth called the Aurora police. Detectives arrived and documented what was becoming a disturbingly familiar pattern. They searched for fingerprints. They searched for DNA. They found none. And when they asked Beth to describe her attacker, she gave them what she could. His height, his build, his eye color, His face was covered the entire time, so that was all she could give. Beth's case remained open, but there were no leads. And then, 9 months later, the attacker struck again, this time in Lakewood, Colorado. The next victim was a 46-year-old artist who lived alone in Lakewood, Colorado. Late one night, she awoke to a masked man who had broken into her apartment. But this victim, she did something that none of the other victims had done before or were able to do before. She managed to escape. In a split-second decision, she broke free from the intruder's grasp and literally jumped out of her second-story window to get away. This moment was later depicted in the Netflix series Unbelievable, and unlike many other dramatizations, this part happened exactly as shown. There was no exaggeration. The victim later said that she believed it was better to risk serious injury than remain inside the apartment with the man who was about to attack her or had already started his attack, The fall actually caused significant injuries. She fractured 3 ribs and punctured a lung. But she survived. And when she survived, she was able to call the police. The intruder, thankfully, didn't chase her. Instead, he fled the scene immediately and was gone by the time Lakewood officers arrived. But for the first time, his haste left something behind. Because he hadn't had time to clean up, investigators searching the area beneath the window discovered a single set of footprints pressed into the dirt. It wasn't a smoking gun per se, but it was something. Officers carefully cast a mold of the shoe print and they added it to the case file. After that, things went quiet, at least for a month. In August of 2010, the attacker struck again, this time in Westminster, Colorado. The victim was a 59-year-old widow who lived alone. In the early morning hours, a masked intruder broke into her home, bound her, gagged her, raped her, and then used basically the same methods we have seen in earlier attacks. But investigators responding to the Westminster scene, they immediately noticed something unusual. The attacker left behind women's high-heeled shoes. It was later determined that the attacker had brought a pair of pink high heels with him and forced the victim to wear them during the assault and during the pictures. The detail was disturbing and it was highly specific. It's not every day that people see pink high heels. Veteran Detective Edna Hendershot of the Westminster Police Department couldn't stop thinking about this case. And it wasn't the only thing that stood out, the pink high heels. After the assault, the victim had been ordered to shower. Her bed sheets were missing, completely taken from the scene, and outside the apartment, investigators found something else. They found a shoe print. Detective Hendershot began thinking back. She remembered hearing about an attempted sexual assault in nearby Lakewood weeks earlier, and the similarities were hard to ignore. So what did she do? She requested the Lakewood case file, and as the 2 files were placed side by side, the connection was uncanny. Each contained a shoe print. The prints were analyzed, and they were a match. Same shoe, same size, same tread, and likely the same perpetrator. As detectives continued sharing this type of information, they learned about the unsolved Aurora rape from the year before, and at that point, it became clear. There was a serial rapist operating across multiple Colorado jurisdictions. And with that realization, Westminster PD brought in the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, also known as the CBI, and the FBI. For anyone who felt anxious watching the Unbelievable miniseries, it's because this story carried a lot of moving pieces. The real break in this case came on January 5th, 2011. That was the day that the perpetrator struck again. This time, the victim was a 26-year-old college student in Golden, Colorado. This victim reported that while she was sleeping, a masked intruder entered her bedroom. He pointed a gun straight at her and told her that he would shoot her if she screamed. She was terrified and she complied with his airy request. The man then tied her hands, gagged her, raped her for several hours, and then he brought out a bag. Inside the bag were thigh-high stockings and pink high heels. The man then forced the victim to put them on, and then he took pictures of her. Afterward, he went through the same ritual that investigators were beginning to recognize. He cleaned the scene, threatened her, forced her into the shower, and then left. The victim, who I'm going to call Chloe, called the police and told them everything. But Chloe noticed something that no other victim had been able to describe. She saw an unfamiliar marking on the attacker's body. Chloe reported what appeared to be a birthmark on the outer area of the rapist's lower left leg, roughly the size of an egg. Detective Stacey Galbraith, who was a sex crimes investigator with the Golden PD, was assigned to Chloe's case, and she was immediately struck by the level of planning involved in the crime. She was also struck by the duration of the assault and the post-attack cleanup. This was not someone who was improvising. This was someone who had done this before and someone who would do it again. Galbraith couldn't stop thinking about the case. And as it happened, she was actually married to a Westminster police officer. That night, as they talked about their respective cases, Galbraith described the Golden assault. And as her husband was listening, he was stunned. He was like, listen, there was a similar case handled in my jurisdiction of Westminster. He then connected his wife with the detective who had worked that other case, which happened to be Detective Edna Hendershot. The following day, Galbraith and Hendershot sat down together and they compared notes. And the similarities were overwhelming. The method, the threats, the restraints, the forced showers, the stolen bedsheets, the high heels and lingerie, the obsessive cleanup, the photographs, and the threats to post them online. I mean, everything matched. Galbraith and Hendershot immediately merged their investigations. For the first time, information flowed freely across these jurisdictions. They looped in Lakewood Police regarding the July 2010 attempted assault and confirmed the connection through the shoe print evidence. Aurora PD, they were also notified since the 2009 rape now clearly fit the pattern. Soon, there was a multi-agency task force that was formed. They pulled in resources from Golden, Westminster, Lakewood, Aurora, the CBI, the FBI, and they were no longer chasing isolated cases. They were now hunting a serial rapist. But even with this, identifying the suspect remained difficult. There were no fingerprints and no usable DNA. Still, Galbraith and Hendershot pursued every lead, and one clue kept resurfacing, and it was that shoe print. Analysis eventually identified that shoe as an Asics brand athletic shoe. Detectives began cross-checking local purchases and looking for men in the area who maybe owned that specific model and size. But there was another detail that stood out. At the Westminster scene, Hendershot had noticed a honeycomb pattern imprint on a windowsill, likely left by the grip of a tactical glove. It wasn't much, but it suggested some form of training. Maybe law enforcement, maybe military. Investigators noted it, and they kept it moving. By early February 2011, about a month after the Golden rape, detectives were fearful that another attack was imminent. So to prevent that, they revisited outstanding leads and pending surveillance requests. And that's when something finally broke. During the Golden investigation, a neighbor had reported seeing a suspicious white pickup truck, they thought maybe it was a Mazda, that had been circling the area prior to the attack. When the investigators looked back at traffic cameras, there were actually captures of a Mazda white pickup truck, but the license plate was unreadable. At the time, Galbraith had asked police officers to remain alert, to remain vigilant for similar vehicles. And one Lakewood officer who heard that request remembered responding to a report months earlier. A suspicious white truck had been parked on a residential street a block from a victim's home before an assault took place. The officer documented it. It was a white 1993 Mazda pickup, and the patrolman had written down the license plate number, but that was all. Well, Galbraith and Hendershot pulled the report, and then they pulled the license plate number and ran it. And the truck came back registered to a man named Marc Patrick O'Leary. The name was unfamiliar. They hadn't heard it come across their desk. He wasn't a registered sex offender either. But as detectives dug deeper, the picture sharpened. O'Leary was a 31-year-old Army veteran living in the Denver area. A patrol car's automated camera had captured his white Mazda parked in his Lakewood driveway just 2 hours after the Westminster rape. In the image, detectives saw Mark. He was a tall man, about 6'1", weighing about 220 pounds with blonde hair. And it seemed to match what victims had been able to describe of the perpetrator. Even more telling were the truck's distinctive features: a missing hubcap, a visible dent, and a sticker. Each detail matched the very blurry surveillance footage from the Golden crime scene. At that very moment, Galbraith and Hendershot knew. They knew that they had their suspect, and his name was Marc O'Leary.
I wrote a little song to remind you, Choice Hotels get you more of the experiences you value. The Cambria Hotel's got it all. A rooftop bar, have a ball. Bring a date, your squad, or even your mom. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Suffering from dry, tired, irritated eyes? Don't let dry eyes win. Use Sustain Pro. It hydrates, restores, and protects dry eyes for up to 12 hours. Sustain Pro. Triple action dry eye relief.
So who exactly was Marc O'Leary? As investigators ran his name, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Mark Patrick O'Leary was born in 1978, and he was raised right outside of Denver in what appeared on the surface to be a fairly ordinary family. But privately, something far darker was taking place. Years later, O'Leary admitted that violent sexual fantasies had taken root at an extremely young age. In interviews after his arrest, this man described being only 5 years old when he experienced what he called, in his words, his first sexual awakening. Now, this reminds me a lot of BTK. So, Marc O'Leary traced his sexual awakening back to a scene in Return of the Jedi. It's the image of Princess Leia chained and controlled. For O'Leary, that image at just 5 years old became fused into his mind, and he had these ideas of domination, humiliation, and power over women. He understood those thoughts were wrong, so outwardly he learned how to blend in with everybody else. As he grew up, he appeared normal, quiet, unremarkable. But inside, those fantasies intensified. By his teenage years, those fantasies had already turned into behavior. You see, O'Leary admitted that he became a voyeur. He broke into people's homes not to steal, but to watch women without their knowledge. After high school, he drifted, he was unsure of direction, and then one day he surprised his family by enlisting in the United States Army. The military gave him structure, it gave him training, it gave him discipline, but it also gave him skills that he would later use. In the Army, he learned how to move quietly, how to be observant, how to plan, and how to cover his tracks. He was stationed in South Korea for a period of time, and in 2004, he married a local woman. But marriage and military service didn't stop the fantasies. By 2006, O'Leary was stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington State. And that, my friends, was when fantasy turned into action. While on active duty, he began attacking women. He would later admit that he stalked potential victims for weeks, he watched their homes, he learned their schedules. Sometimes he even broke into their homes without attacking them while they weren't there, just to conduct what he chillingly called pre-combat inspections. You see, these pre-combat inspections included him making sure there were no dogs, no alarm systems, and no weapons that could be used against him. He then selected his victims very carefully. His first victim was Marie in 2008, then the 63-year-old woman in Kirkland. After leaving the Army in 2009, O'Leary returned to Colorado, newly divorced and no longer constrained by military oversight. By then, this man was fully operational, and in early 2011, law enforcement finally had his name. The task force placed O'Leary under quiet surveillance. Investigators wanted to avoid tipping him off while they secured the evidence needed for a search warrant. But then, on February 13, 2011, after days of coordinated planning, a SWAT team swept in and arrested Marc O'Leary at his home on Harlan Street in Lakewood. With a warrant in hand, detectives searched the house, and what they found exceeded even their worst expectations. Inside O'Leary's bedroom closet, Detective Stacey Galbraith discovered a box. Inside that box, she discovered photographs, stacks of them. Images of women bound, gagged, terrified, many were immediately recognizable. There was Beth, the 65-year-old grandmother from Aurora, exactly as she had described herself, restrained and frozen in fear. There was the 59-year-old widow from Westminster. There were images connected to the Lakewood case. And there was the 26-year-old college student from Golden. Every victim, every story, right there, confirmed. Beyond the photographs, police uncovered an entire collection of items that O'Leary had taken from his victims. Investigators found a pink Sony CyberShot digital camera that was later confirmed to have been stolen from the Westminster victim during her assault. That was the camera that O'Leary subsequently used to document his crimes after that. Now, they also found women's shoes, including pink high heels several victims had been forced to wear. They found lingerie, personal items that had gone missing from multiple crime scenes. There was also a handgun and knives. On O'Leary's computer, forensic analysis discovered a folder simply labeled Girls. Inside were more than 100 photographs. Images of rape, images of terror. It was a private catalog of violence kept and organized by O'Leary himself. The evidence in this case was overwhelming. And later, when he was confronted with everything, Marc O'Leary did not deny what he had done for long. Rather than force his victims through a trial, he chose to plead guilty. In October of 2011, O'Leary ended up pleading guilty in Colorado to 28 felony counts, including rape, kidnapping, burglary, and sexual assault. In December of that year, he appeared in a Jefferson County courtroom for sentencing. Victim impact statements were read in open court, some by the women themselves, others by representatives speaking on their behalf. Though each victim's experience differed, their words carried the same message. O'Leary had stolen their sense of safety, their trust, their peace. He left them haunted inside their own homes. One woman wrote that if O'Leary were ever released, she would live in constant fear, always wondering whether he was watching her, waiting for revenge. Another listed what he had taken from her, not in objects, but intangibles: her freedom, her calm, her belief in the goodness of people. Even seasoned prosecutors were shaken by this case. The Jefferson County DA told the court this was one of the most extreme cases his office had seen. He described how O'Leary preyed on women, stalked them, and meticulously planned each attack to ensure total control. O'Leary himself addressed the court, and he didn't do himself any favors. He called himself a sexually violent predator. He admitted that he had been out of control for a very long time. He said words were inadequate to describe the damage that he'd caused. And on top of all of this, he acknowledged that if someone had done this to someone he loved, he would want that person dead. It was the closest thing to remorse that this man could express. The judge was unmoved. Marc O'Leary was subsequently sentenced to 327.5 years in prison for the Colorado crimes, a sentence designed to ensure that he would never walk free. After sentencing, O'Leary was transferred to the Colorado Department of Corrections to begin serving his time in a high-security facility. But the case was not finished. What about the cases in Washington? From his prison cell with nothing left to lose, O'Leary began cooperating with investigators. In 2012, he was formally charged in Washington state for the rapes of Marie in Linwood and the 63-year-old woman in Kirkland. And this is where Marie's story comes back into focus. We have to remember her. She was the first confirmed victim, the teenager who was told she was lying, the young woman who was pressured into doubting her own reality and then charged with making a false report. Well, inside that same box of photographs recovered from O'Leary's home was an image of 18-year-old Marie, bound, terrified, exactly as she had described. And that was when the investigators from back in Colorado were determined to find out who she was, and they did. With the photographic evidence and the DNA linking O'Leary to the Kirtland assault, he ended up pleading guilty in Washington as well. A judge subsequently sentenced him to an additional 68.5 years in prison. They also ordered that prison term to run consecutive to his Colorado sentence, just in case. In total, Marc O'Leary was sentenced to nearly 400 years behind bars. As of today, he remains incarcerated in Colorado, and he will never harm another woman again. With Marc O'Leary locked away, it would have been easy to think that was the end of the story. But in many ways, the real impact of this case was only just beginning. For the survivors, the work of healing continued and continues. They showed extraordinary courage, not only by surviving what was done to them, but by later facing their attacker in court and speaking the truth out loud. Because of them, O'Leary would never harm another woman again. In Colorado, the collaboration between Detective Stacy Galbraith, Detective Edna Hendershot, and the many agencies involved became a model for how law enforcement can work when information is shared instead of siloed. Golden Police Chief Bill Kilpatrick later called it a great example of what law enforcement can do when we work together as a team, noting that hundreds of investigative hours and resources across dozens of agencies led to O'Leary's arrest. The case reinforced a critical lesson. Crimes like sexual assault don't respect jurisdictional boundaries, and neither can the investigations meant to stop them. But the most important legacy of this case had nothing to do with procedure. It had everything to do with belief. Marie, the very first known victim, had been failed in 2008. She was traumatized twice, once by the rape itself and again by the people who refused to believe her. After O'Leary's arrest in Colorado, and once investigators realized that O'Leary had committed assaults in Washington while he was stationed there, Linwood police were forced to reopen Marie's case. The evidence recovered from O'Leary's home made the truth undeniable. Marie had been telling the truth all along. The Linwood Police Department publicly acknowledged that Marie was in fact the victim of a rape, and that serious mistakes by the department had been made. Her false report conviction was vacated. Her fines were refunded. No kidding, the detective gave her $500 in an envelope, and the charge was expunged from her record. An internal review concluded that detectives had coerced Marie into recanting by focusing on minor inconsistencies instead of the core facts of her report. In 2014, Marie sued the city of Linwood for mishandling her case. The city settled for $150,000. It was an apology that came far too late, but one that formally acknowledged the harm done. In the aftermath, the department instituted new training, requiring that no sexual assault report be deemed false without definitive proof of fabrication. Officers were instructed to prioritize belief and investigation, not their own personal assumptions. It was a correction born out of failure. As for Marie herself, she rebuilt her life quietly. She stayed out of the public eye, and even today, her full name has never been released. After the Netflix series aired, a few details emerged. She moved away from Washington, she found steady work, and she started a family. She found peace, but it took many years. And as Marie later said, the damage caused by not being believed cut as deeply as the rape itself. The story of Marc O'Leary and the women he harmed reached a wider audience in 2015 when journalists T. Christian Miller and Ken Armstrong published An Unbelievable Story of Rape. That's the title of it. It's called, quote, An Unbelievable Story of Rape, end quote. Now, the investigation exposed not only a serial predator, but the systematic failures that allowed him to continue. The article actually went on to win the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting, and it became the foundation for the Netflix miniseries Unbelievable, which very closely followed the real events. Public response to Marie's story sparked broader conversations about how sexual assault victims are treated. Research consistently showed that false reports of rape were rare, estimated between 2 and maybe 10%. Yet skepticism remains the default response in far too many cases. Today, Marie's case is actually used in law enforcement training as a cautionary example. The lesson is simple. Listen to the victim. In the end, the case against Marc O'Leary reflected both the worst and the best of the criminal justice system. It showed how easily a predator could exploit disbelief and how powerful truth becomes when people finally pay attention. For what he has done, Marc O'Leary will never walk a free man again. Instead, every morning he will wake up in prison with the knowledge that the women he hunted were brave enough to put his sorry ass behind bars. In this story, the survivors, not the rapists, had the final say, and their message was heard loud and clear. Now, before I sign off, I do want to do a quick wrap-up on the 2 lead investigators who helped bring down this man. After the O'Leary investigation, both lead detectives continued in distinguished careers. Stacey Galbraith was honored as Officer of the Year by the City of Golden for both her role in solving the serial attacks and other major cases. Stacey Galbraith went on to serve with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and later became a criminal investigator for the Jefferson County DA's office, where she continued her work on complex criminal cases and advocacy for trauma-informed investigations. Edna Hendershot remained with the Westminster Police Department and was promoted to sergeant and later to patrol commander, mentoring new officers and shaping how law enforcement approaches sexual assault investigations. She has also shared her experience at conferences and training events, emphasizing interagency cooperation and the importance of listening to survivors. True Crime Army, please let me know if you have watched Unbelievable, the Netflix miniseries, or if you had heard of this case before. I am very intrigued because as I researched this case after watching the miniseries, like I said, I was shocked. And honestly, being in the military can give rise to very similar cases taking place without being tracked because we move so often. Cases can take years to investigate, and with us military people moving every few years, perpetrators easily slip through the cracks. And listen, I served as a victim's counsel back in the day, and it's true. Many of the perpetrators that I encountered were serial predators. If a victim didn't come forward right away, the perpetrator was further emboldened to continue committing their crimes against new victims. So everybody, I'm gonna say one thing. Stay safe out there. Sometimes evil does wear a smile on their face, and sometimes they wear a uniform. All right, everyone, if you haven't already, check out that Unbelievable show on Netflix. My sources for this episode include the Pulitzer Prize winning investigative story by T. Christian Miller and Ken Armstrong, as well as articles in A&E, CBS News Denver, Seattle Post-Intelligencer, ABC News, CBS News, and Westward Denver. I'm also going to be linking the Pulitzer report in the show notes just in case you want to read it. All right, everyone, Military Murder is a Mama Margot production. The music was created by Ty Apps. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous month, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next month.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Stitch Fix. Stop shopping. Get styled.
Not today, sweatpants. Somebody's wearing jeans that fit.
Wow! No photos, please. I'm just a regular dad who happens to have a stylist.
I really look my best when someone else makes the decisions.
Hey, we can all see you two-way mirrors.
Just share your size, style, and budget, and your stylist sends personalized looks right to your door. Stitch Fix. Get started today at StitchFix.com.
I want to hug you. I'm going to hug you. I'm coming in for a hug.